e4 by Magnus, and Alireza goes for the Caro-Kann. He wants to fight it out. Plays a fighting opening, and you can see Magnus trying to decide now what to do next. Magnus can of course go for the main line with d4. He can also play c4. He can go for the two knights with knight f3 and knight c3. But more importantly, Magnus is cooling himself down, trying to assess his mood as to what he wants to play against Alireza. He goes for d4 and instantly Alireza responds with d5. We have the Caro-Kann on the board. But Magnus is not yet decided. He still has questions for himself. Should he go knight to c3? Should he take on d5? Should he play e5? Now notice each variation, each line has a different mindset that you need. If you're going to play e5, you need a fighting mindset, and that is what Magnus is trying to assess right now. What is his mood for this game? Does he want to fight really hard, or does he want a simple position against Alireza? And to decide this, he has taken close to 2 minutes on his clock after just 2 moves. That is not common. That is not common. But the world champion understands that if he doesn't make the right opening choice, he won't be able to beat his young and talented opponent. And that's the reason why he's thinking so much. And only when he is sure he's going to make his move. There you see Magnus just thinking really hard, looking at the other side. He has now 12 minutes 44 seconds. e5. He wants a full-fledged fight. He pushes his pawn to e5. Alireza instantly once again plays bishop f5, and now you can see Magnus blitzing out his moves. He's made his decision about what he wants to play. Knight comes out to c3 and knight to e7. And here Magnus Carlsen has slightly more space on the board. h3. Now this is an uncommon move. a3 is the main line in this position. h3 is something that Magnus has played before against MVL, but only 10 games have been played before. This seems like some secret Magnus Carlsen line. Bishop back to g6, and now Magnus plays b3, bolstering his center. He has more space. He wants to ensure that he also keeps more pieces on the board. Knight to f5. Bishop develops to e2 and bishop b4, pinning the knight. Magnus develops his bishop and Alireza castles. So black has castled, so has white, but now black needs to reclaim space on the board. So after some good thought, Alireza decides to break in the center with f6, an excellent move, trying to fight for space. a3. Alireza, give me your bishop there. Bishop takes c3 is what Magnus wants, but Alireza keeps his bishop on the board. Now takes on d5. Generally you take back with the c pawn, but here taking with the e pawn is also possible. Alireza takes on d5, and now Magnus takes on f6. A French-like position has arisen with black's bishop being quite well placed on g6. Taking with the knight looks like a good choice, but Alireza decides to take with the queen. You can see the time. Alireza is now down to 5 minutes. His last few decisions have cost him a lot of time. Magnus, who took so much time in the opening, is still 5 minutes ahead. In fact, now 7 minutes ahead on the clock. This is pure pressure for Alireza, who's playing the world champion. He wants to exchange a few pieces, and rightly so, because white has more space than black. But now there are new weaknesses in the position. Alireza is asked the question, where do you want to move the bishop? If bishop b6, there is knight a4. So bishop goes back to d8. Maybe he wants to put his bishop to f6. But notice e6 is weak, and so Carlsen attacks it with bishop to g4. And he plays bishop f5. Magnus takes it instantly. You can't take with the e pawn. Your d5 pawn is hanging. So Alireza takes back with the rook. And now Carlsen comes up with a very interesting plan. He goes queen e2, attacking the e6 pawn, but also freeing up the d1 square for his knight to embark on this journey towards the weakened e5 square. Alireza puts his knight on f8. He wants to permanently defend the e6 pawn, and knight comes to d1. Now black has to be careful. Either move the rook or play h5 so that later the knight doesn't get the g4 square. But bishop b6 is not the best, because now Magnus gets his knight to g4. But rook g5 played by Alireza is threatening queen takes h3. But this is not a great idea. Magnus calls the bluff instantly with f4. He attacks the rook and asks Alireza, what is your rook doing exactly on g5? If you go back, there could also be f5 coming in. Rook to g3 by Alireza. Wow, is this some kind of an attack, or it's only a bluff? Magnus, first of all, solidifies his position with king h2. He can now threaten something like queen f2. Rook goes back to g6, and now f5 would have been pretty strong, but Magnus goes with his knight. He wants to go to e5. You can see Alireza coming back with his pieces. Magnus clearly has the advantage and the initiative here. But how to move ahead? a4. He is now gaining space on the other side of the board. But more importantly, he wants to place his pawn on the light square so that his bishop can be activated from this side. Bishop to c7, and b5 has been played. You can see how systematically Magnus is activating his position. Bishop d6 stopping bishop to a3 in the position. And now queen e3 or rook f3 would have been a good idea, but Magnus goes rook c3 with the idea of bishop a3. But Alireza says, I'm going to exchange your rook and not allow you to exchange those bishops. Takes, because clearly black's bishop is much better than white's. Knight comes out to e5. Rook f6. Alireza is fighting back, and after rook c1, he has 1 minute 40 seconds on the clock. Magnus has 4 minutes. Queen to d8 has been played here. Somehow Alireza has managed to get a decent position. He's fought back like anything. Now he can actually take on e5, but he decides first to play rook f5. Good move, threatening to take, maybe. Magnus goes queen d3, and now taking on e5 and then taking, and g5 would have been the best, but he goes g5 directly, and this allows Magnus, who's very alert, a small tactical idea. He goes knight g4, and now knight h6 is a fork in the position. So that's the reason why Alireza seems to have missed that move and is thinking he has 1 minute. Now king g7, knight comes back to e3. White still has the initiative. The rook has to move. Rook f7. And now very important move, f5. It is important to keep that position slightly closed because this bishop is an absolute monster on this diagonal. Good move by Alireza under pressure, keeping his calm. Magnus also building up the pressure. Rook f1. Both players do not want to blink. h6, king g2. And at this point, queen c8 or something that keeps status quo was important, but king g8 is a blunder because now the h6 pawn is undefended. Knight comes to g4 and h6 is attacked. You can see Magnus played it instantly, and Alireza cannot be happy with this position. You can see he shakes his head. Magnus looks up. These subtle expressions are what tells you who's winning in chess. Knight g4, h6 is hanging. He had to play king g7, but now f6, the pawn moves in, and not only that, you lose the h6 pawn. Alireza knows the game is lost because in such a situation, he can play on for a few moves, but Magnus is in complete control. He has a passed pawn on f6, knight on g4. Alireza shaking his head. He had played so well to fight back and had gotten close to equality, but just when that happened, the pressure became too much to handle and he blundered. And now with just 30 seconds on the clock, he goes queen e8, maybe hoping for something like queen h5 in the position. Magnus now has to find the most precise way to convert this position. He goes bishop a3, offering a bishop trade, takes, on a3, queen takes a3. Now you can't even move your queen because your knight is hanging. White is so winning now. Queen to c8, maybe looking at some kind of a entry, but Magnus denies it. Queen back to e8. Knight comes in to e5. Well, if you play f7, he wants to sacrifice an exchange, but Magnus is not going to bail out so soon. You know, he's going to put the pressure. He's going to get a lot of material here. Queen to d8, rook f1, king h8, and now goes queen to e3, attacking the g5 pawn. How do you defend it? That's not at all easy. Queen to c8, hoping for some activity down to c2, and now you can see how Magnus not only is very focused here, he plays in a very prophylactic way as well. Plays rook f2, stopping queen c2 check. When you are winning, there is no need to hurry. He has 2 minutes 20 seconds on the clock. Alireza has only 18 seconds now, 15 seconds. There's look of resignation on Alireza's face, but he's still making a few moves. g4, Magnus keeping things closed with h4. Black can hardly move here. Rook h5. And now Carlsen finds a very nice maneuver. He goes in for a check with his knight. And after king g8, he puts his knight on g5, e6 under pressure. The rook is almost out of the game. Everything is falling apart. f7 might come in.